The offshore passage from Seychelles to South Africa via the Mozambique Channel is notorious for its strong winds and dangerous sea states. We have been worried about sailing this ocean passage ever since we started planning it before we left England 5 years ago. Our first leg is 830 miles from Seychelles to Mayotte, through an area described in the pilot guide as a witch's cauldron of wind and waves.
We are Matt and Amy. We've been living aboard and sailing around the world for 5 years now on our 37-foot sailboat Florence.
We've had an amazing 3 months here in Seychelles, but as always the highlight was something totally unexpected. When we came into the Seychelles, we anchored not far away. We saw all these guys racing their lasers and we came down and said, can we come and join in? And they said yes.
Dinghy racing is how we got into sailing, and we race dinghies in the UK almost every weekend, right up until the point we decided to sail around the world and needed a bigger boat. It was fantastic to go dinghy racing again, and the competition here is fierce.
We were invited to compete in the Laser Class National Championships. Thankfully, this was covered by the local TV news, and they've allowed us to use some of their footage as we were far too busy racing to hold a camera.
Sailing is available to everybody in Seychelles, with the government providing all the equipment. It's awesome to see sailing being made available to all. Matt managed to just win the laser radial class by a single point. But by far the best thing about this was the friends that we made with the other sailors. They really looked after us, showing us the beaches and hiking trails of the main island and cooking us some fantastic local Creole food. We had an amazing time with them and wish that we could have spent longer in Seychelles.
Unfortunately, we always have to move on eventually, and with our visas nearly expired, we have been keeping a careful eye on the weather forecast, searching for a weather window to allow us to set sail south towards South Africa. It finally looks like we have an opportunity to depart with just a few days left on our visas.
Before we can sail out to sea, we need to stock Florence up for the voyage. Here in Seychelles, that means getting the folding bike out for the 8-kilometre round trip to the shops, as taxis are so expensive. Cruising on a budget means a lot of time lugging things around by foot and on a bike. We don't know if we'll be allowed to stop in Mayotte due to COVID, so we need to have enough cooking gas and food on board to sail over 2,000 miles, all the way to South Africa. It's amazing how much you can carry on a bike. Not forgetting to do the laundry too.
We also need to top up with fuel. We managed to land the dinghy on a beach just a 600-metre walk from the petrol station, meaning not too far to carry 60 litres of diesel. This is another time we are glad we don't use much fuel. So we're about to set off from Seychelles to sail down to Mayotte, which is the first part of our passage onward down to South Africa. This is a passage that we've been worrying about for a couple of years now, because it is a passage which is a little bit more serious from the weather point of view. Most of the way around the world we've been following the trades or having trade winds blowing us downwind, and this passage we've got to go more upwind, or at least been reaching, and there's some weather systems that can come through and create some quite nasty conditions. The forecast looks good at the moment for the first section to Mayotte, and we hope it stays that way because it's quite changeable. But yeah, there are a few nerves for this one, more than I've had. For me, I'm actually pretty nervous right now. Yeah, but also really excited to get going and move on to a new country. We're not sure whether we'll be allowed to stop in Mayotte due to COVID. We think we will, but we haven't had a response from them.
It's always a mix of emotions when we leave somewhere, because we've had such a fantastic time in Seychelles, but it feels really good to be starting moving again and actually starting to sink our teeth into this passage, because it has been hanging over us ever since we decided that we were going to take this route. The only blogs that I found of people that have gone this way, a few of them have said that it was the worst passage that they've ever done. So I'm hoping that that's not going to be our experience. But we have both taken our seasick pills this morning, and it's not very often that we do that, so that just gives you a bit of an idea of what we're expecting out there.
Yeah, really what we're looking at is potentially being uncomfortable and having a rough passage. It's going to be stronger winds, waves on the beam, which makes the boat roll lots because they hit the beam and really roll you over, so it's just going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be more strain on Florence, so we've had to make sure we've prepared her well. We've gone up the mast, done a rig check, we've had her out of the water in the yard, we've done everything underwater. We think we've done everything we possibly can to make her as ready as possible, and she's a strong boat. She's got us this far, so she should get us the rest of the way, hopefully.
From Seychelles to Mayotte is 830 miles, which should take us about 6 days. The part we're most worried about is the area just north of Madagascar, known as the acceleration zone or compression zone. This is where the South Indian Ocean trade winds come up against the tall Madagascar coast and get squeezed around its northern tip, causing a dramatic increase in the wind speed. This is what the book says about the passage. Southbound passages from Mahe are usually hard on the wind. At the height of the southeast monsoon, the prevailing wind may attain an acceleration of 15 to 20 knots in this area, producing rough and confused seas north of Cap d'Ombre, which has been described as a witch's cauldron.
We've waited here in Seychelles for 3 months so that we can make this passage at the optimum time of year, just as the southeast monsoon subsides. We've been watching the weather carefully and the winds have been steadily reducing, but we can't leave it much longer as we will be then entering cyclone season. Right, I think we let this rain go through and then we go.
Yeah. Victoria Port Control, this is Sailing Yacht Florence, channel 1-2, over.
Calling Port Control, good morning, Commander.
Port Control, this is Sailing Yacht Florence. We are requesting permission to depart Seychelles and Port Victoria bound for Mayotte, over.
Okay, Florence, leaving Port Victoria for Mayotte. Okay, if you have your clearance and all your papers on board with you, permission granted from me, and safe trip for your destination. Thank you.
Mayotte, here we come!
Yeah!
Our first challenge is to beat out of Port Victoria and south down the coast of Mahe until we can set course southwest towards Mayotte. So that's the southern tip of Mahe just behind us. We've had to beat down the coast and now we can crack off and head directly where we want to go. It's about 800 miles from Seychelles to Mayotte. We're hoping that's going to take us 5 days, maybe a little bit longer. But now we've got open sea in front of us. There's a few islands to avoid, but on the course we're on at the moment, we should be clear for the next 400 or 500 miles.
Now clear of land, it was time to engage the wind vane self-steering and settle down into a few days of life on the lean, sailing fast to the southwest.
The next couple of days were filled with fast, bumpy sailing. Believe us, the camera flattens the waves. It was rougher than it looks, but also awesome sailing. Well, out here we've got absolutely picture perfect sailing conditions. It wasn't like this at the start. This is actually the end of our third full day at sea, and the first 2 days at sea we were completely and utterly wiped out, just so tired. It's partly to do with watch routine, so lack of sleep, and also partly to do with the fact that the boat's moving around so much that it just knocks us out of us, and we're just completely and utterly wiped out. We're so tired. If we're not actually sailing the boat, as soon as we swap over watch, the person who's going below just goes straight to bed. But normally by day 3, like now, we're starting to feel a little bit more in sync with everything, a little bit more in sync with watch patterns, and just starting to enjoy the sailing. We've got much better conditions out here than we thought we'd have. When you look at this route traditionally and the normal weather conditions you get a big acceleration zone and a lot of wind off the top of Madagascar, and it looks like that's not going to happen here. We've come for a weather window that looked like it would be lighter winds there, because we don't want to get caught in a really strong blow. But it actually looks like we're going to run out of wind when we get there, which is not what you normally have in this part of the world. So that's better than having too much wind. The wind's just starting to ease off, the sea's starting to flatten off, and it's just beautiful sailing. With Florence sailing along on a reach in steady conditions, there's very little that we need to do except hang on tight. The steady wind strength and direction means no sail changes are needed. Florence just sails herself whilst we cling on, keep a lookout and enjoy the view. This little bird decided Florence was going his way and hitched a ride for a while.
It's been 5 days since we opened the hatches and 5 days since we enjoyed a cup of tea. That's what the weather's been like for the last 5 days, and I guess an indication of how we've been feeling. But there's been so many waves coming over the deck that we haven't wanted to open the hatches. It also felt too dangerous to be making and drinking a cup of tea. It just felt like it would end up all over us. The conditions were just so bouncy, and it doesn't really come out on camera, but it's kind of like trying to live on a bouncy castle with some kids bouncing around while you're trying to sleep and cook and generally live.
We've been sailing really fast in quite bumpy conditions up until now, but now we're starting to run out of wind, and that's because we're just sailing into the lee of the island of Madagascar, which is over the horizon over there, and that's stopping the wind getting to this part of the ocean. And we knew this was going to happen. We know there's light winds between Madagascar and Mayotte, and it's just going to be tricky. We're going to have to shake this reef out and maybe even put the spinnaker up just to try and keep the boat moving as the wind drops off.
The conditions were so much better than what we were expecting to get on that passage, and I think that we got really lucky to get round the cape at the top of Madagascar in the conditions that we had. I think we had about 20 knots max as we were coming round there. So it feels really good to be into the Mozambique Channel, but I guess it's just the uncertainty of what we've got ahead that I'm struggling with a little at the moment.
So we're not stopping in Madagascar because we're not allowed to, because it's closed due to COVID. It's been closed for ages. And Mayotte, where we're going, we hope we're going to be able to go ashore. We don't actually know whether we will or will not. It's a little unclear on their status as to whether or not they're open, and they didn't respond to any of our communication that we sent before we left Seychelles. So we might get there and find that we're not allowed to go ashore. We might even get there and find we're not allowed to anchor and they just tell us to carry on to South Africa. But we really want to stop there to explore, and we also really need to stop there to wait for a better weather window down to South Africa as well. But it's a little bit uncertain what's going to happen. Some other boats did get responses from the authorities at Mayotte, and we've had COVID test in Seychelles, which we believe is what we need to get into Mayotte, but they just didn't respond to us at all. So it's a little bit uncertain, and even the other yachts that are going there aren't sure whether or not they're going to be allowed ashore there.
As we crossed into the lighter wind zone, the wind direction also shifted because it was curling around the top of Madagascar. So after so long without adjusting the sails, we had to pole out the genoa.
As the wind died further, we were back on the bow to hoist the spinnaker to try and keep Florence moving. We tried leaving the staysail up with the spinnaker, but that didn't work as it just blocked too much of the wind from reaching the spinnaker. It might work better on a tighter angle, but not on this broad reach. We've got the island of Gloriosa just on our port side, which is the first sight of land we've had since we left Seychelles. And now it's just gone really, really calm. We're just drifting along. The spinnaker is just filling, and I think tonight the wind is going to completely die.
144 miles to go at 2 knots. 3 knots of wind. At the moment we've got gorgeous blue skies and flat water and sunshine, so it's not really like we have anywhere that we need to be.
So we have made it past the potentially hazardous compression zone at the top of Madagascar without any major trouble by picking a good weather window. It's a relief to be able to relax in the calm weather as we drift onwards towards Mayotte. Or so we thought.
Well, we would have to ask you to come into the island to get a fine, because it's a military terrain of France.
Next time, we get into trouble with the French authorities as we drift too close to what on our chart is a nature reserve, but apparently is a military base. And we find out whether or not we're allowed ashore in Mayotte. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and click the bell to get a notification when the next video is released. And let us know what you think of the video. We love reading all your comments.
We would like to thank everyone who supports us, and especially our star patrons.